What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 12 fantasy football defense rankings heading into week 5. This is a new video for me. I typically don't rank defenses until we get to the fantasy playoffs. I know some of you guys have been asking for it, so we're going to try it out this week. We'll see how the video does. If you guys like it, you want this to be an every week thing, just let me know down below. But I did want to get this video out before you guys would have to make your waiver wire claims. Just, maybe these defenses are out there. You can scoop them up, on the first round of the waivers. So let's dive right into it here. Starting off with my one and only tier 1 defense, it is going to be the Broncos going up against the Raiders. And I think this is a really nice spot where you can blend a defense that has been very productive for fantasy with a matchup that I think is very, very favorable. So the Broncos so far have put up the 4th most fantasy points per game amongst all defenses. You look at the Raiders, defenses going up against the Raiders have put up the 5th most fantasy points per game. And then for this specific week here in week 5, the Raiders have the lowest implied points. The offense is not great. Devontae Adams, who knows what's going on with that situation. So I think the Broncos are a very, very strong play this week. Then looking at tier 2, I actually have 2 teams going up against each other. So my number 2 defense is going to be the Patriots going up against the Dolphins. And defenses going up against the Dolphins have put up the 2nd most fantasy points per game. In the 2 games without Tua, the Dolphins have only managed to score 3 and 12 total points. Miami only has 19 implied points this week, so Vegas does not think they're going to play well. It's just been a really rough situation without Tua. You have the weapons, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane. It has not come together. So I think this is a pretty solid spot for this Patriots defense. On the other side of this matchup, we have the Dolphins going up against this Patriots offense. I talked about how defenses going up against the Dolphins have scored the 2nd most points per game. The Patriots are right behind them. Defenses going up against this Patriots offense have scored the 3rd most fantasy points per game. They have maxed out at 20 points through 4 games, and they have the 2nd fewest implied points this week. So I really don't think you can go wrong. You can play the Dolphins, you can play the Patriots. I think both these defenses are going to be solid. It's probably going to be a pretty gross, low-scoring game. And then my final tier 2 defense here, it is going to be the Vikings. And maybe they don't have the best matchup going up against the Jets, but this defense has been on a roll to start off the season. They are 1st in fantasy points per game. They are leading all defenses in sacks, and they are tied for 1st in terms of interceptions. So I don't think this Jets offense has been potent enough where I want to avoid, entirely a defense that has played well. So I don't have the Vikings ranked as like number 1, which is how they're producing. But in a matchup that I don't think is terrible, we've seen them give up points and still be able to produce for fantasy. So I still think the Vikings are a solid play, even though they're going up against, Aaron Rodgers and this Jets offense. Now, looking at my tier 3 defenses, starting it off here with the Seahawks, and I will say this is a tough spot, to rank the Seahawks early in the week because we just don't know what's going on with the health of a lot of their starters. So this is kind of like a placeholder ranking if they can get, a few more guys healthy, because heading into that Lions game, they were missing 5 of their 11 starters. Obviously, we did not see the defense play at a super high level. The Lions put up a ton of points, just carved right through them. That was really like the one bad game they had fantasy-wise so far. So I do think they bounce back. This is a nice matchup. Defenses going up against the Giants have scored the 6th most points per game. The Giants have the 3rd fewest implied points, but I would like to see this defense get a little bit healthier. If you have all 5 of those guys missing again, I'd probably drop them a little bit, but honestly, still a decent matchup here going up against the Giants. Now, after the Seahawks, I have the Bears going up against the Panthers. This Bears defense, fantasy-wise, has been very impressive. The 3rd most points per game through 4 weeks. I think this matchup is definitely less appealing than it, would have been after the first couple of weeks where you had Bryce Young in there. This Panthers offense looked terrible. They've actually combined for 60 total points in the last 2 weeks. But I think you compare the Bears defense to like the Raiders, the Bengals, I do think there's a pretty significant difference. So I don't think this is a spot where like 2 weeks ago, the Bears probably would have been my number 1 defense. We're not quite there, but I still think this Bears defense is very, very playable. Then we have the 49ers going up against the Cardinals. The 49ers have the 5th most fantasy points per game. You look at this Cardinals offense, doesn't seem like a great matchup to go up against, but the last couple of weeks, they've come out kind of flat. 13 points in week 3, 14 points in week 4. And that was in a spot against 2 somewhat friendly matchups. You had the Lions, then the Commanders. Lions, fine, 13 points. but to not get over 14 going up against the Commanders, which really seemed like a great spot, that's concerning. Now they draw a tough matchup here against the 49ers. I think the Niners defense is a solid option here. And then the final tier 3 team we're going with here is the Packers going up against the Rams. The Packers have the second most fantasy points per game. They're leading the NFL or tied for the lead in interceptions and fumble recoveries. I'm expecting no Kupp here for the Rams, so no Cooper Kupp, no Puka Nacua. This is obviously not an offense that's going to be at full strength here. The Packers defense has been solid. I think they can capitalize on it here. Now shifting into tier 4, definitely defenses that are still playable, maybe not quite smash spots, but they're fine. We have the Steelers, and this is kind of picking a good defense in a not so great matchup. The Steelers defense has put up the 9th most fantasy points per game. The Cowboys are sitting at an implied point total of 20.5, which isn't great, but also not terrible here for the Steelers. The Steelers have allowed 10 or fewer points in 3 of their 4 games, and those all weren't against like terrible matchups. I know week 4 wasn't great, but they've gone up against some decent offenses. I think it was the Falcons week 1. I think there was another decent team in there that they kind of held in check. Maybe it was the Chargers. So I think the Steelers are still a solid play. Cowboys offense hasn't exactly been flawless through 4 weeks here, so I think they're a fine matchup. Then we have the Chiefs going up against the Saints. Chiefs defense has been decent. They're only allowing 18 points per game. The Saints this week have the 4th fewest implied points. So even though they came out hot week 1, week 2, 40 plus points, Vegas has really not given them a ton of respect in this matchup. So I think the Chiefs are definitely playable. Then I have the Raiders going up against the Broncos. This is an interesting spot because you're kind of targeting the matchup, but I don't have a ton of faith in this Raiders defense. The Broncos are averaging 15.8 points per game, so a pretty low number there. They have the 7th fewest implied points, but once again, it's tough to fully trust this Raiders defense, but the matchup is definitely there. And then kind of a similar spot here, a defense that is pretty tough to trust, the Commanders going up against the Browns here. The Commanders actually have the fewest fantasy points per game through 4 weeks, so it might seem crazy to have them up here in my top 12, but the Browns have the 9th fewest implied points. You look at the last couple of weeks, they've held some teams in check, allowed 18 points to the Giants, 14 to the Cardinals. I think that was 2 of the last 3 weeks. Basically, my point is that when they're going up against softer matchups, Giants, Cardinals, they're not awful as a unit, so do I love them here? Maybe not, but if you're desperate, they're probably, guaranteed to be on waivers. This Browns offense has not looked great. I do think they could be playable this week if you're in a pinch, but that is going to wrap it up for my top 12 defense rankings. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button. Any fantasy questions, drop them down below. If you guys want to see me do this weekly, just let me know and, I'll consider things. But thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.